Hello, everybody. I continue to be John Atack to this very moment. And this is my dear friend and colleague, Joe Szimhart. Hi, Joe. How are you doing today?
Hi, John. It's morning here and it's evening there. Is that right? Or late afternoon?
It's afternoon. Yeah, we have a 5 hour difference, I believe.
And the
So,
important thing is we're both awake.
yeah. And I still can't understand why it is that I can't tell you what to bet on a horse because I'm 5 hours ahead of you. And you should be able to rake in the winnings from me being ahead of you in time. But apparently that
Right.
doesn't work.
It does for
Curiously.
some people, but they have to be convinced first to let go of their money.
Yeah, well, there is that to it, and of course you have the trick called the wire, which is recorded in the movie The Sting,
Oh
which
yeah.
an old one from the 30s. But I don't have the people to set that up, I'm afraid. So never mind.
Well, anyway, so here
Anyway,
we are. Um, so you asked me to think of a topic, and
mm,
as usual, I've read another book,
cool.
and
Why do you keep doing this?
I don't know, but this one I got very cheaply.
Oh, that's good.
And even though the title's a bit obscured by the price, which was $1.50, but it's called The God Market
Ah,
by Mirananda. Came out around 2011, 2012. But it's very current in
mm,
her observation regarding how globalization is making India more Hindu. So, the more we have a spread of Hindu ideas, like through Deepak Chopra and Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, that's been going on for many
mm,
decades. That business model reverberated back in India. So they have gurus making money also in their own way because India has, especially in the last 30 years, become a capitalist force.
mm,
Their middle class has gotten incredibly large over there. In fact, it's practically equal the population of the United States. India's billion and so people
mm,
is triple that of the U.S. about it. So if one
mm,
third of their country is middle class now, well, that equals the U.S. in terms of what they have.
mm,
But that leaves quite a few poor. And what she points out in this book is that lower class, the caste system, still has a consciousness there, despite the attempted democratization by Nehru. Uh, they are still struggling. You still have a lot of poverty in India,
yes.
and so this idea of raising the boat for everybody doesn't work. She points out that trickle down economics is just a word.
Mm,
Reagan used to use it back in the day, and
yeah, and Margaret Thatcher.
so inevitably people with power want to keep power. I mean, that's the basic theme going on here,
Mm,
whether they are a guru or what. What she points out, what's interesting here is that there's a kind of a guilt. It's baked into the Indian consciousness through its culture regarding that this world is an illusion, the material world is an illusion. We shouldn't get caught up in it. So as a result, the very wealthy are now participating in the God-man market. They are
yeah.
supporting Hindu temples. They are building giant Shiva temples and Hanuman temples and whatever,
Mm,
supporting these gurus that are becoming millionaires. And it's that wealthy class that's attending these workshops and becoming Hinduized. She says because of an innate cultural guilt over, maybe not guilt, but kind of proof that we're not caught up in the material world. We
mm,
really are spiritual beings, and meanwhile they go home in their Mercedes Benz and have 15 servants in their house and maybe have a yacht on the side. But the point she's making is that there is a big shift in consciousness, and as you can see on the cover of this book, there's the goddess Lakshmi in the middle of a U.S. dollar bill here. So,
this is the
uh,
goddess that Maharishi, so called, claimed he had worshipped in the south of India, and this had given him the principle of transcendental meditation. He also claimed it was while meditating in the north, in the Himalaya,
yeah.
but it was Lakshmi, the goddess of fortune, of money, of wealth,
Mhm.
to whom he
Right.
devoted himself, and I believe his fortune came to $8 billion.
Oh yeah, well that makes sense. But he's not one of the biggest ones anymore. There's many in India now that have outpaced the Maharishi.
Mm,
They're more savvy in terms of the modern business model, but he definitely was a prototype
mm,
of
certainly, yeah.
how that business, the business of Hinduism could be sold.
Mm,
Um, she mentions him in here. So, I read it and there's a lot of good things in it. She finishes in the end here. I'll read it, which is kind of the thesis of the whole book.
mm,
She says that the danger in India today, and of course this is 12 years ago, but
mm,
still prescient to that for today. The danger today, as this book has tried to describe, is that the sacredness reserved for gods is getting transferred to secular entities like the nation. So So that brings us to, her use of the dollar bill. So I started looking at our dollar bill, the back of it
mm.
here, the Great Seal of the United States, which came from the 18th,
Pluribus
19th
unum.
century.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, the all-seeing eye on top of the Masonic pyramid. Interesting symbol because when you consider the background of groups like that, they're business models and they believe in the elite guiding society, much like the Theosophists had the Mahatmas, which borrowed from Freemasonry
Yeah.
and the Rosicrucians, and so the elite should be in charge of the plan with a capital P for the human race.
Mm,
And this is the hidden force behind this kind of consciousness of the nation state and of the leader of the nation state being in touch with the zeitgeist or the god of the nation,
mm,
and that filters down. you can I just read a long discussion on Pythagoras and Pythagoreans, which is very
mm.
good, and I'll send you a link for it so you can put
Yeah.
it up. But in there, the scholar points out that um, among all the scholars that have studied Pythagoreanism and why it collapsed,
Mm,
the main reason was because of its elitism. And Pythagoras was well educated. He was,
mhm,
Orientalized and Egyptianized and whatever, went through mystery schools and was quite an impressive, charismatic figure and considered the first philosopher. He invented the word philosophy according to Plato or somebody. But he was also quite the entitled type of enlightened person who felt that this knowledge should be secret, much like the
mhm,
Egyptians had secret knowledge among the priests, and that only people in the club or the clan or the cult that knew the secret handshake should be given that
mm,
knowledge of the music of the spheres and the mathematics and the sacred geometry and all that good stuff.
mm.
And so he developed a form of government which is kind of a top-down government like this.
Yeah.
And it worked in some places for a while, but very soon, even within his own structure, some elite Pythagoreans began rebelling because um, he was quite nepotistic, and his followers they only gave to their own kind that were
Yeah.
initiated in the club power within the structure, and therefore everybody else had to put up with this.
Mm,
So democracy was essentially erased, even in democratic colonies back then that were, had some kind of democracy. And so there were rebellions. The Pythagorean temples were burned. There's several versions of how Pythagoras died. He may have been killed. He had to flee. The one version that seems to be the most reasonable, he committed the form of suicide, meaning he starved himself to death over a 40-day fast, self-imposed death. So there's no proof of any of this, but that's the
mm,
most likely because he was so elitist that he felt that he could merge back with God through this ritualistic death in sort
mm.
of a way. And
That's,
he was already ascetic in the sense of being a vegan or a vegetarian, and they practiced fasting and all of that, and
mm,
his scruffy followers that look more like maybe they dress very plainly, kind of like maybe modern day hippie types, um, look down upon the uneducated, unenlightened, uninitiated, and that led to a lot of tension. So, we're describing what we call today a cult, the us and them kind of a thing from Pythagoras. But Pythagoras has influenced in many ways this top-down way of governance, right?
Mm.
And having the elite or the initiated or the aristocracy tell the people what to do because they're the smarter ones. And of course, U.S. government originally they decided to upend this model and break down government into the people up,
Mm.
instituting voting and whatever. And of course, it's been a struggle since then to get that right. We got people that were considered property, like slaves, couldn't vote. Women that were considered property, they couldn't vote. And finally, we broke through a couple barriers there in the U.S. model. But what I was thinking of when you look at this thing that we celebrate on the dollar, it's quite revealing of Plato's Republic, which is also a top-down form of fascist rule.
The
And there's a
philosopher
symbol,
kings.
right? And there's
Yeah.
a symbol of it right on our money. Um, what I got to thinking was the reality of what we are really is if you turn this dollar upside down and look at that model. So I did this sketch where you have on the one side the pyramid thing on the dollar, but
Mm.
it's top down, and of course the masses are at the bottom, and it
Mm.
comes from Plato, Pythagoras, and the Republic. But
Mm.
if you flip it this way, you're going to see that we're funded by evolution, by nature. So there's this, if you want to call it the God force,
Mm.
the all-seeing eye, is funding everything that's happening on Earth, from evolution, from bugs to humans to whatever. And humans being what we are, or species being what we are, you kind of capture that energy and then hold on to it somehow. And then you have this long, like a lion, stays a lion for many, many, maybe thousands of years before it
Mm.
begins to change, or millions of years. I don't know. Some of these creatures, like crocodiles, have stayed the same. But human
Very long
beings
time.
having to form societies, like Plato said, the noble eye, or to create the polis, we have to imagine them. What happens is this pyramid gets inserted into this whole scheme of things emerging from creation, and we have to capture that energy and create these little pyramids of power, like clans, in order
Mm.
to function, because otherwise we're too dispersed.
Mm.
It's too, you can't have a family without some kind of authority within it,
Yeah.
making decisions, and
Yeah.
you agree to that. So we come up with thousands and millions of these pyramids or clans or cults or whatever, in order to
Hierarchies. Yeah.
hierarchies to get people to function. But the ones like the Pythagorean uh, approach to this forgot where he came from,
Mm.
which was just another manifestation of this divine. And what he started doing was taking his idea of the divine
Mm.
and then funneling down as if he captured exactly what it was, the perennial philosophy in his head, where he's just one of these little tiny things.
Yeah.
It's much
Million.
bigger than he ever got.
Mm.
And I think that's what's missing in this argument in politics as well, that we have this inspiration from the Bible or whatever, or from the Vedas, that this is what we are. We're Hindu, and it comes from God, and we have to remain this way in this pyramid that we built. And it's interesting too that the Egyptians built these pyramids as tombs. They're kind of idolizing the fact that they know God, they know what they
Mm.
inverted the entire purpose of nature,
Mm.
which is to create whatever it creates, and we try to capture that in our knowledge, in our pyramids of or schemes of living, and but sometimes we begin to mistake the thought experiment for the divine experiment.
Yeah, and and then fix upon that. I mean, what you're telling us is that this is a pyramid scheme, right?
Yeah, yeah. Every but some of these pyramids are better than others
Mm,
because they recognize that they are a small thing within a much greater
mm,
inverted type of pyramid that you're trying to mimic or
mm,
somehow capture. But the real power doesn't come from above that the aristocracy knows and can filter down to us.
mm,
The real power is something that's almost unknowable, but it's coming low. We don't even see it. We can't capture it. You
mm,
know, we try to capture it, but we really can't. It continues without us. You know,
mm.
the Earth, of course, would easily be destroyed by nature by, let's say, a large enough asteroid, and nothing we think or do means anything anymore. It all disappears. You know, so nature will have the final say.
Mm.
Uh, but we try to have these final says in our own little worlds and set them onto people in sometimes very harsh, fascist, cruel ways, kind of like Putin's doing in Russia,
Mm.
you know, at this point, mistaking uh, that that power as divinely given when in fact we've only captured a part of it and we don't own it.
No, absolutely. And
So that's
in
basically the thesis I came out of reading this book.
well worth the $1.50, if I may say so.
Yeah, it was okay. Not a bad investment. I read her other book called God's Looking Backwards,
Yeah.
um, or
Mm.
Prophets Looking Backwards, which is also similar to this theme, which is pretty good.
Yeah,
Yeah, I have a copy of it here somewhere, but anyway, yeah,
so much. You have said so much. So much ground has been covered.
probably too much, but
No,
maybe,
let's
maybe
give
you
it
can parse it.
let's give it a try. That firstly,
Here's a
the
dollar. Here's a dollar for your thoughts, John.
oh, it used to be just a penny. I'm doing really
Yeah,
well
but
now.
now, you know,
I'm going to
it's
be
inflation.
rich. Um, so yeah, that the confluence of religion and nationalism, which we, you know, in the Western world with the so-called Enlightenment in the 18th century, which didn't cast as much light on things as one might have liked. That we got this idea of the shift to nation, so that where one had previously, say in the Crusades, when I think it was Pope Clement who said, if you kill a Muslim, that doesn't violate the commandment, thou shalt not kill, because they don't count. And what's more, you will go immediately to heaven if you do so, which was a little bit of a twist. Then we start getting the temporal powers. We start getting the idea of uh, really the divine right of kings, the idea that, as Romans 2 in the scriptures says, that we, you know, our leaders are appointed by God, which
Hmm.
is why the family cult, which is so into American politics and politics around the world, the prayer breakfasts and all of this stuff, that we see them claiming a power. You know, they teach that both Stalin and Hitler are taught as role models to interns in Washington D.C. No, this can't be true. Yes, it is true, and well documented. Um, so we find this mixture where an authority is determined. You know, you don't understand it. There's somebody above you, the eye in the pyramid, the big brother, whatever, who does understand it. They're in charge. And just as the Sumerian and Babylonian and Egyptian and Indian and Chinese emperors and kings took their power from the divine, or so they claimed, you know, so the Chinese emperor had to move through the four sections of the palace, or the seasons would not occur, apparently. It's a very
Yeah,
difficult one, that. Um, and that moves over into the nation state and the idea of really having a devotion to the nation state, which has taken the place of a divinity. And then you get the melding together of these things, so that it's only under Eisenhower that America becomes a Christian state. In God
yeah.
we trust. which violates the Constitution, of course, and the freedom of religion, one might say. And we get these authorities which are elected, chosen, because they are authorities, because it says so. I mean, this last week I've been watching Bart Ehrman's YouTube channel with great fascination.
Oh, he's great.
Yeah, and to see somebody, even though he has a very strange laugh, I must say, yeah, sort of,
Oh, yeah.
sort of throws me a little bit, but he has studied this material in such depth, and he's sort of saying, well, actually, you say this is the received word of God, and you have to do what it says. However, let me point out, and he'll take something like the woman caught in adultery, that story from the Gospels, and say, well, this story wasn't actually in the Bible until I think the 10th or 11th century. So he let him who is without sin cast the first stone is not actually an authentic story. So we have people who are believing it. He also points out, of course, that snake handling is not in the Gospels. It's something that's added later on. But these things then take on this special authority. And this is where life becomes extraordinarily dangerous. I will take this on trust. I will believe this because Narendra Modi tells me that I should believe it. And then when we get into some of the threads of this, I got into an argument very soon after leaving Scientology. There was a gentleman called Robin Scott, who had been a high-ranking Scientologist, and he set up an independent Scientology place up in Aberdeen in Scotland called Candercraig. The house was later bought by the great comedian Billy Connolly, who I'm sure put it to much better use. But my first meeting with Robin Scott, he came to visit me in December 1983, and there were 6 people in my living room, and along he came, and he started declaiming about the philosopher kings and how, we are now the philosopher kings. And I said, so does that mean we're going to put girl babies out on the hillside to die and kill all the poets? And he went, and I'm not going to shout because I don't want to blow people's ears out, but at the top of his lungs, he said I was the rudest host he had ever had, and marched out. And years later, in 2015, I was in Toronto talking to Jesse Prince, and Jesse said, oh, I've got friendly with Robin Scott. And I said, oh, he's still believing the philosopher kings? And he said, yeah. It's like, so we are the electoi, the elite, the superior beings. We have special knowledge of how to run the world. That is the most chilling thought to me, that no matter how clever somebody is, that they don't belong to a different another species. They don't have the right to get rid of modesty and humility and believe themselves this. It really is bad for us. Looking at the development of Hinduism in modern day, I mean, I am horrified by the so-called Pink Revolution, where Muslims are being murdered on the streets through claims that they are eating holy cows. They're eating beef. This is promoted by Modi. Indeed, when he was in charge in Gujarat 20 years ago, there was a massacre of about 2,000 Muslims, which the former Foreign Secretary here, Jack Straw, absolutely condemned and said there was no doubt. And the witnesses to that, including 2 senior police officers, died in mysterious circumstances before the Indian Supreme Court declared Modi completely innocent. So he's a member of the BJP. He's a member of this group since he was 8 years old, which was based upon Mussolini's youth movement, and they later adapted to the Hitler Youth. And that movement still exists. We had, of course, Savitri Devi and her tremendous influence on Indian politics, who believed that Hitler was an incarnation of Vishnu and taught this, and was sent to prison in 1948 by the British for handing out propaganda in Germany. There is a tremendous influence of this Aryan nationalism and the confusion now between the different meanings of the word Aryan, whether we mean the Indo-European peoples represented by the Indians, or whether we mean people who come from Atlantis, as according to Madame Blavatsky and Adolf Hitler. But so, and this, hatred of the other, fear of the other, this way of saying you're not like us, we belong to this. And
Mhm.
so, as you say, generation upon generation, the powerful and wealthy adapt the belief system to be in their favor. So the idea, where the Protestant church under Zwingli, who was almost never mentioned, and Luther
Right.
at the beginning of the 16th century.
You know, what's also interesting here that she brings up quite clearly is that government in India is promoting like Ayurvedic science, in quotes, in schools and setting up universities that teach astrology, Jyotish astrology, and other things, and have also created schools for the temple priests for decades now to not to almost memorize by rote what they have to teach. It's not
Yes.
about thinking, it's about memorizing,
Mm.
and that each priest teaches the same thing to all the people so that they understand the essence of their Hindu culture. What's interesting about this notion of rote memorization and repetition, this goes
Mm.
way back in Indian culture. I have a book called Karma and its origins, the idea of it. And the idea of making karma or not goes back to the ritual that in ancient times, in the earliest religions in India, uh, the idea of doing the ritual precisely
Mm.
meant that you didn't create karma,
Mm.
that your action was precise and in tune with nature and with the gods, and then the god would be pleased and there was no further action to be taken. But if you messed it up, then there would be reaction and
Mm.
reverberate through time. So the idea of precisely repeating what the government schools, the guru schools are teaching priests to do in the temples without variation, um, is working because it's similar to like in Catholicism, but not the same, where every Catholic has a catechism,
Yes.
and that's what you believe. But and every Catholic repeats the same
Who
general
made
prayers
you?
in
Who made
Mass.
you? God made me.
Right,
Yeah.
right, right. But they have the same. You can go to any church and you
Mm.
have a same kind of rhythm in the Catholic Mass.
Mm.
The only thing that's varied is when the priest or the preacher gives a homily, he can come up with all kinds of stuff, you know. So that changes where you don't have homilies
Mm.
in the Hindu temples. That's about praxis, orthopraxis, not orthodoxy in teaching.
Mm.
So it's different than here, but you also have here in the US, and she brings this up in her book, since the 20s when all of this was emerging, this kind of neo-fascist way of running society and organizing the nation state, um, the idea of fundamentalizing, creating the fundamentals of Christianity, that if you don't follow these, you're not Christian. And
Mm.
that's become pervasive through many, in some form or another, especially through the evangelical churches. And that's been
Mm.
the base that's growing the most through charismatic renewal and whatever, but they stick to these fundamentals, which you
Mm.
find repeated over and over again. For instance, Noah really did build the ark, and that humans and dinosaurs left footprints together, and that kind of stuff comes out of that kind of teaching. But it's a way of dogmatizing God's word
Mm.
according to a very new version of Christian religion,
Yeah, very
which is
new.
only about 100 years old.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean the literist interpretation, and we've seen the same thing happening, of course, in Sunni, the Sunniya in Islam, where
yeah,
Wahhabis or Salafis, they're basically saying put away the discussions of the text, put away the scholars' work,
right.
and you interpret what's in front of you. Now, if you're not fluent in 7th century Arabic and the nuances of 7th century Arabic, you might have a few problems there. But
Mhm.
we're also, these religious vehicles. I was the other day I was looking at something, and reminded of Bhagavad Gita, where it says, "As man believes, so he is."
Yeah.
And going, well, that's a really wise thing to share with us. But when you set it then in the Mahabharata and all of this teaching, and if you look at, say, Torah, the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, uh, and the Jewish view of Pesha, that we can interpret these things. These things
Right.
shed light on our experience. What do they mean? Rather than saying Daniel literally, Jonah literally, these
Yeah.
things actually happened. There is something subtle in them, and all of that's being thrown away and saying these are the rules, and if you don't follow them, you're going to be in big trouble. In fact, you are in big trouble right now.
Right.
And we don't,
In other words, you have to stay within the pyramid,
yeah,
the upright pyramid.
and it's a
And of
form of,
course, Scientology and the cult I was in, Church Universal, did the same thing, that you have to be within this teaching because it's the new revelation. It's
yeah,
been revealed, by the leader who enters heaven and brings it back down to us, kind of like the whole idea of Plato's cave. And
yeah, we're seeing the shadows and
then
interpreting
there's
them.
something wrong with them,
Yeah.
and again, the pyramid is stuck over you as if it's coming down from God, whereas it's only a capturing of what this mysterious evolution of life is. It's an attempt to capture it somehow, and sometimes the way they capture it is by creating slaves of the captured instead of just an educational institution, where you allow people to weigh whatever it is within the pyramid and then leave. But the pyramids can become a trap. And I think on the US dollar, obviously, the symbol is more of a symbol rather than a reality of how we should run government. But now we're seeing that thing become a reality of how we should run government, that we know who God is. We are the Christians. God brought around this about this nation, and now we have to pack the court, pack the state, judiciaries or whatever, in order to bring God's law down to everybody. And this is what the tension is right now. It's really started, I think, more so with Reagan, politically than anywhere else. And then you saw, which is back to 1980, which he says it started in India. You could really see more of it starting back then in terms of real politics. But who knows where all that's going to go? All I know is that life inside those pyramids is quite stifling for me. And you know, but once you in your head you flip it and turn it over, you realize there's a lot of freedom in life, and the pyramid is basically a toy in our hands when the real emanation of the divine, or whatever you want to call it, is way too mysterious to capture. I mean, we try to do it through science, we try to do it different ways, but at least through science, we keep um, changing the model as evidence comes through, and as we perceive things differently. But within political cults, they don't want to change the model. They want to go back to something they think was real, and and impose that on today's society.
Yeah, and it's become a tremendous force. We have, of course, Alexander Dugin and his work on neo-traditionalism, which has so
Right.
profoundly influenced Putin. And I read one of his books, which is not something I'll do again. Thankfully, it was very short. But to say, well, what are the basic ideas of neo-traditionalism? Because there didn't seem to be a clear statement of it. And the simple idea is that we want to return to the time of Ivan the Awesome. I'm not going to translate it as the terrible, as often done.
Right.
The Ivan the Awesome, and we want a feudal society with serfs, which is to say slaves, and that's what we're headed back for. And I'm not sure how many people who've got into this neo-traditionalist war that they fought against Georgia 2008. They've been in Ukraine since 2014. That this is a war based upon pan-Slavism, which is the sibling of pan-German ideas coming up around 1900 in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And this has taken on a religious sense that now, Russians are believing themselves, because of God, that they are meant to do this. And the Orthodox Church, of course, the patriarch in Moscow, who's been repudiated by all of the other patriarchs of the Orthodox Church, but he's decided that, yes, this is a holy cause, and away we go. So people type these thoughts, and where science allows us to question, and is a method, is a way of looking at the world and trying to be more rational, trying to get better solutions. It too can stultify into belief systems where we have to believe, in the selfish gene, for example. That was an interesting belief of the last century, which still hasn't quite evaporated, even though it's actually rather dangerous way of thinking. There's nothing you can do to change anything. It's just your genes being selfish. In fact, we can do everything to change things. We can change our minds. We have cultural transmission, and we have a certain degree of intelligence. But yeah, so looking at how in India, I mean, a couple of months ago, we had this enormous wedding that cost hundreds of millions of dollars to put on. And there was an expectation that the Indian people, many of whom are living in abject poverty, 40% of Indians, some huge amount, are in conditions which would just, you are absolutely kidding me, not be acceptable in the world that we live in. And it was thought that this might spark revolution or rebellion of some kind. And instead, it sparked adulation. They were called the new royalty. It's, oh, isn't it great they're spending all of this money, which could actually be feeding everybody in India. All of the kids are.
But you have to remember, this comes back to identification, and we're all anxious about our identities. Who are we? What are we? What are we doing here? Are we apes? Are we human? And all kinds of questions.
Are we Devo?
So,
yeah.
So there are people that take advantage of this, obviously, and say we're not only going to give you an identity, we're going to give you a special identity. We're going to make you special, and that's where the danger comes in. It's okay to have. Yeah.
So I mean, watching
your clan is much superior because it's the wolf clan than that lousy turtle clan that they're too peaceful and they're never going to win. That kind of look at the self and the inability to follow ahimsa, which is ancient idea of peace, and the idea that
satyagraha, the truth force.
Yeah, that in the eyes of God, we're all equal because in a way, in the eyes of the universe, we're all equal because there's no favoritism going on from that point of view. Entropy will take care of all of us in the end. Entropy is the main God that we should be most wary of, and not Satan. So
and Satan too is pretty much an invention of more modern religionists, not a force really in the Old Testament, not a force really in the New Testament. The devil, as perceived by Christians, is an invention of later times, now believed to be absolutely scriptural, but it doesn't have a basis in the gospel.
Yeah, I have this book on the death of Satan and how he rose again in the late 19th century. And the idea that you have among fundamentalists of the devil and demons and whatever comes from this rather new reworking. It wasn't, I mean, among the folk traditions, they had ideas of demons and whatever, and they could be manipulated all through the ages. But as far as it becoming a major doctrine among church leaders, this is really something new and scary. The whole and I think part of it comes from, again, the challenge of science and psychology, the idea that these forces within us, the shadow, the evil forces that Freud was trying to dig out,
unconscious mind,
they weren't demons, they're not demons.
Yeah.
And so the church had to rescue the idea of the spiritual world in order to maintain the idea of God by reestablishing exorcism and demons, that they're real. Because if you don't have real demons, you might not have a real God. I mean, that's the thinking, but that is the thinking. uh, behind the rescue of Satan. And but it's anyway.
I had
Yeah,
a,
we went
I,
through that. You know, you and I went through this during the cult wars. Satanism was like, besides Scientology, the biggest topic in the late '80s, if you remember.
I
Uh,
do. The
yeah, you
satanic
know,
panic. And
yeah, yeah,
we're into another one now that in Holland it's raging again.
it is again. Okay.
And you've also got anthroposophists in the government in
Uh,
Holland. So theosophy has found its way in there. And understanding the profound influence that these ideas have, that
yeah,
by demonizing some set of people or by, we have riots on our streets this last week because people are attacking immigrants, they're attacking Muslims. And it sort of boils under the surface. And you know that this is through propaganda. This
yeah,
is through having completely erroneous ideas about other people because our educational system has never bothered to teach us about other cultures and how they function. You might get a little smattering of it. We've got to be tolerant of their beliefs, but understanding, for example, how science and medicine and washing soap came in from Islam to Europe in the 12th century, particularly 11th, 12th century, or the way that the Ottoman Empire was ripped apart by the British, the French, and eventually the Americans, putting in little despotic kingdoms like Saudi Arabia or Jordan, rather than making the world safe for democracy, as Woodrow Wilson put it. And all of the justifications that go into this. I mean, looking at the two Iraq wars and saying, well, Reagan, Bush, Bush Jr., they're people who believe in Armageddon. They're people
yeah,
who believe that Jesus was on his way back. Jesus is going to be here. You're going to be here soon. And every generation from the first Christians onward has believed in this Armageddon. But of course, the Jews had their own version of this. The Greeks had
yeah.
their own version of this. The Vikings have
Well, the
their own
Hindus as
versions.
well with the Kali Yuga, they believe it.
Exactly. Only they stretch it out a bit longer than the
Oh
Christians
yeah,
do. But
yeah,
but this sort of external force that is pushed upon us, and we're all here waiting to see the horror of Indian society. There was about 15 years ago, a guy went on the Salt March, which Gandhi had gone on in the 20s. And he stopped off at every place with his little documentary crew. And he
yeah,
came to a conclusion. He said, it's worse now than it was then. The caste system now, with
yeah,
more than 2,000 different castes within, the overall architecture of this, to be a Dilat, to be an untouchable at the bottom of this.
mhm.
What a despicable idea that this
I
group of
think
people are damned forever.
right. This book brings it out too, and it's very difficult to get this word caste out of the Western mind because
Hmm.
it didn't exist in India. What they have there is systems of Varna and Jati, and
meaning
like you said,
meaning
there's
color.
color,
Yeah.
right? Which you look at, the lighter people are Brahmins and the darker ones are Dalits. That's part of the scheme. But the Jati, there's thousands of factions,
Hmm.
and so they're like big clans, and they could be part of a Kshatriya or Brahmin clan or whatever. But you don't marry outside the Jati, not just outside the caste.
Hmm.
So there's a tightness of like little pyramids of culture throughout India, thousands of them that interact in some way, but it's very difficult to understand unless you live in it. And so we in the West have this four-tier system of the four castes, which the British and so forth have imposed upon the Indians. And a lot of Indians accept the terminology now because, they say, I'm a Brahmin. But in reality, if the Jatis within these so-called castes are what really dominate the common Indian mind and how they might operate socially. I think, Lisa, that's how I understood the book. And
Hmm.
when I was in India, I kind of picked that up from talking to people. This is about 40 years ago.
Hmm.
Um, so it's a lot more complex, but the overall idea is still there, that there's a hierarchy of entitled people, and uh, and there's a hierarchy of duties, dharma, that people have to do. And if you're born to be a street sweeper, well, God damn you, you're going to be a street sweeper. And if you
Hmm.
try to break with that, you're going to have to come back in another lifetime and be a street sweeper again anyway. That kind of a thinking is still embedded, I think, in a lot of the consciousness.
Absolutely, and it denies the competence and capacity of individuals. I mean, within Indian history in the 20th century, Ramanujan,
Right.
one
Yeah.
of the most brilliant mathematicians of all time.
Yeah, I have
Um,
his book here. It's great. The Man Who
yeah,
Knew Infinity.
yeah, I've read this too, and
Yeah.
there's a movie now, and um,
Yeah.
but to
I've seen the movie. I've seen the film. It's pretty good.
yeah, yeah, I thought so too. Um, but that in the system in which he existed, it wouldn't have been possible for him to achieve position. He
No.
certainly wouldn't have been developing theorems at a
Mhm.
university in highbrow university in England, and that's those impositions, those things that, like, the book says this. Therefore, the one that's been interesting me this week, I've been thinking about it. It's now a century. It's the centennial of Canada criminalizing cannabis. Now, of course, Canada has decriminalized and legalized, in fact, cannabis, but it was made criminal
Yeah.
in 1924. And the reason it was made criminal, and this comes from a book by a learned professor, it's not something I've seen on the internet, um, was that a woman under the name Janie Cannock
Mhm.
wrote a book called The Black Candle, and explained that the purity of the white race was going to be sullied by the use of cannabis, because white women were going to smoke dope and they were going to find the nearest black man and miscegenate. And that's why cannabis became illegal in Canada. That's the only reason. 4 years later, 1928, the British government followed suit and made
Uh,
it illegal based upon the very hard evidence that Canada had made it illegal. Um, some years ago, the head of Professor David Nutt, who was the head of our government's advisory body on the misuse of drugs, and he got into a lot of trouble. The Home Secretary at the time, Jackie Smith, came to him and said, "You can't compare legal and illegal drugs in the way you are doing. You can't compare the effects of them." And he said, "Why?" He said, "Well, because some of them are illegal." And I think that puts us into that kind of religious situation where it's say,
yeah.
well, the book says you can't do this. And why can't I do it? Well, because the book says so. Rather than this kind of enlightenment, this rational, scientific method, this
Yeah.
approach to things which demands evidence, we are all too readily pulled into believing as our forefathers believed. And so, in Ireland, we'll have the Orangemen marching against Sinn Féin and the Catholics without any deep understanding of who they are and where they came from, and
Mhm.
the the unity that we might have. That the movement to free Ireland was actually, there were as many Protestants involved with that as Catholics in the 18th and 19th centuries, and then schism happened because this is the book we read and that's the book you read, and
Right.
people come to believe that, like the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, or L. Ron Hubbard's famous brainwashing manual, which is now one of the most read books in the far right in America.
Yeah.
And I interviewed two people who were there when he dictated the damn thing, as to whether it's authentic or not. I interviewed two people who were in the room when he uh,
Yeah.
gave dictation of it, straight to his typist, in fact, Henrietta de Wolf. And so we have this authority that is hinged not upon us opening our eye and looking into the pyramid and seeing what's going on and determining for ourselves, but wants to make us subservient, under the great weight of the pyramid, with Big Brother watching us all, or little sister,
Mhm.
in the terms of Alexa or Siri, or have you, listening to us all the time and reporting what we are doing, or making material that has has been made available to the FBI in the past, that we're now in this surveillance society where we're going along with it because, well, the politicians know best, don't they? The corporate leaders know best. Elon Musk knows better than we do. Jeff Bezos knows better. Mark Zuckerberg, surely he's a good man. Surely we can trust Bill Gates. And we've
Mhm.
given power to these people to influence us by not questioning, by not saying, yeah, but
Okay,
what
but
does this
John,
actually
let's
mean?
let's back up a little bit. We're conditioned for good reasons to think that way. We all attend school. We trust the teaching system. We trust that we're going to learn something valuable. Our parents trust that when they send us to school that we're going to learn something valuable. Now that's all come up for question now, of course, and especially like in the US among people that homeschool their kids and think the educational system sucks. You
Yep.
don't learn anything, and you certainly don't learn about God there. So we're going to keep our kids at home and teach them about God, as well as mathematics and Noah's Ark and whatever we want to, you know.
Mm.
And so the trust in which a system that Jefferson thought and Franklin thought was good, the public school system that they wanted to set up, has eroded considerably. And it's gone all the way up to the university level in this country, so that the standards of knowledge are in question and challenged. So, you know, we might end up like India with more and more schools that are based on some kind of religious principles like Ayurvedic wisdom, where priests are taught, and, you know,
Mm.
alongside of geography and mathematics and computer science is also taught astrology and, you know, the magical healing arts and all of this that come out of the ancient Veda, as if they're equal,
Mm.
as if they're equal forms of knowledge. And that's where the problem has come in. But we've been conditioned in some way to trust that pyramid system of an aristocracy of teachers teaching us. The difference is in the public education is you can challenge within the system, especially at the upper levels. You can write debating papers and you're not punished for that. You know, you might get an F if it's really crazy and doesn't make any sense, but it's only a grade. You know, it doesn't mean you're going to be condemned to hell or don't follow God, right?
Mm. I mean, we have an interesting situation here because we take in a lot of medical doctors from African and Indian schooling
Uh,
because they still maintain the colonial system
oh,
in training. So their medical schools are very like our medical schools. And I I have serious problems with our educational system. It's authoritarian. The things that are being taught are not about, you know, how to communicate, how to resolve problems, how to assert yourself. You know, the intelligent disobedience of my friend Arachelov. Instead, obedience is being taught,
yeah.
and the subjects in and of themselves have become so disrelated to life. So, you know, I'm learning about watersheds in geography, and that's going to be incredibly useful to me in future, I'm sure. That we've seen it particularly in the arts curricula, that say in music and the way that music is being taught. And one of my sons has now had 4 years in music college, and I'm going to go public. I'm appalled. They have they took over a private music college. These things flourished in the 90s and the noughties here. They did really well. And then they sold them into the university system, and they started then imposing university systems of testing. So my son is a virtuoso guitar player. He receives no guitar tuition. In 4 years in a music college, he's received no guitar tuition. What they do is they say, go into the studio with these other students and give us this ABBA song in a different version, or go and work on a song. The relationship is, oh, we'll now give you a paper, write something about the invention of the ribbon microphone, you know, or, and you start seeing a subject being academicized, so that
Yeah.
there's, what can we test people on? And in the end, you're going, well, look, these music schools were set up, and they were very successful, to train kids, to give them an environment in which they could go from there, go on stage and make money in the music business. And they
Yeah.
did. They don't anymore. The system is, within 10 years, in fact, it's only about 5 years since it was taken over by the university,
So it sounds like,
degenerated.
let me see if this is correct. It
Yeah.
sounds like they're imposing what creativity is
Yeah.
and what excellence is. They're imposing that on them instead of allowing it to emerge. You know, there's always some students in an art school or a music school or a dance school that just they're funded by nature to thrive within the system, and then they actually stretch the system. They go, you know, they're so good they go beyond it, and the teacher can't teach anymore.
Mm.
You know, there's there's those exceptions.
Mm.
But it sounds like this kind of teaching would even thwart the exceptions from thriving.
Yeah, I mean it's I mean the thing that particularly bothers me is that kids are being asked to write down the stages of their inspiration, you know,
Uh,
and so they become analytical about a process that is absolutely natural. And it's like you're driving a car and you've got to think about where you're going to move the gear stick and all of this and why did you
right.
do that? Why did you turn left there? And rather than just getting on and getting to the target and making something wonderful. So
Yeah, it sounds like a system like that could have ruined Taylor Swift's career if she was in
yeah, and of
it.
course Taylor Swift at the age of 14 was signed as a songwriter and
Yeah,
is now. I saw this last week. Somebody said they were talking about her animosity towards Donald Trump and said that she is the most celebrated person in the world.
interesting.
I don't know how you measure that,
You know,
but
that
I think there are
demographic,
probably Indians and Chinese that are far more celebrated because their
it
populations
might
are
be,
bigger.
but she packs houses wherever she goes,
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
so
And it has the largest fleet of private jets of any individual, I believe. So
is that
contributes
right?
more towards pollution than anyone else in the world. Um, but you know, she's got nice legs. And
And you know, for all, I mean, her songs appeal to a younger set,
yeah,
obviously. So
they're
they're not baby boomer songs, you know, they're for
no,
people that from that generation that's younger than her.
yeah,
And
and just
she's able to exploit that quite well.
yeah,
Um,
and I, you know, she fascinates me because she exemplifies what I call a benevolent narcissist. People who are, they have no sense of self, as with
mhm.
any narcissist, so called, and so their sense of self comes from the outside. They can only mirror, and looking at documentary footage that comes from her life, from because there's footage of her as a small child
Oh yeah,
is, and she's saying it again and again. Oh, what if people don't like it? What if people don't like it? And she's
yeah.
making something that I think is good and positive and healthy, though not for her. I think it's destroying her career.
Well,
Which,
she grew up. Her family is less than 15 miles from where I'm living now.
ah,
So I know that culture, that area, and it's a rural county near Reading, Pennsylvania, and so she had country roots. Let me put it that
mm,
way. And she
yeah,
actually initially went to Nashville in
absolutely.
order to start out. So she had a sense of, and I think that still comes through because she can be a very friendly, natural person
Mm,
around average people, and that's a part of her appeal. You
yeah,
know, she's had
yeah.
that ability. So yeah,
And you know, we saw those lads from Liverpool who started with no philosophical basis.
right.
I was surprised to see Paul McCartney saying that he and John Lennon used to sit and play and sing Mahler songs.
Yeah.
There's an influence for you. My God, how wonderful! But we saw them by the time they were. You know, somebody criticized Paul McCartney's daughter Stella and said, "Well, she's having her first fashion show and she's only 25." And he said, "I was 25 when we made Sergeant Pepper." It's like, okay.
Yes.
But that I think that it's quite possible because Taylor Swift is very competent that evolution will go on, and by the time she's 40 years old,
Yeah.
she may
Before,
have got closer to Joni Mitchell or you know some one of the true greats in the field. But
yeah.
um, I stray from our topic, and
Yeah,
with
we getting back to how we started with the dollar in India.
yeah, and
I think I think in a sense we could wrap this up in a bit, you know, and maybe you can quote Hubbard for us when he said it was all about making money. How did he put that?
it's it's called the governing policy of Scientology. It's a policy letter, therefore it's in force and has scriptural weight for all Scientologists. And it says um, the governing policy of Scientology is make money, make more money, and I think make people produce so as to make even more money. And in fact, there's a little apocryphal story that a man who was the executive director international of Scientology went to Hubbard, and Hubbard had said to him, "What is Scientology for?" And he said, "Oh, it's to help people, sir." He said, "No, it's to make money." And this guy said, "Oh, I see what you mean. We have to make the money so we can help people." And Hubbard said, "No, it's to make money."
Let's leave it at that. I think that explains the whole guru business
Yeah,
pretty well.
yeah.
So,
Fantastic. Well, we will meet again in the
yeah,
nearness of
John.
time. Always a
Okay.
great pleasure to talk to you, Joe.
All right. It was fun.
Yeah.
Do it again. Take
Yeah.
care.
Hi, John here. Thanks for watching. We'd appreciate it very much if you would click like, as well as subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Every dollar helps, and we welcome new patrons on Patreon, or you can make a one-off payment with any currency through PayPal. Thanks so much.